Hello and welcome back to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. In the first part of the discussion, we've been looking at issues of police accountability in regard to the deaths that took place during the 2011 Birmingham Riots. As demands there grow for a public inquiry, this part of the discussion now looks at the reasons behind those disorders and why that incident might impact on how that incident might impact on future relations between the police and the communities. Joining me in the discussion again to discuss this are Dr. Tim Parsons, Professor Bill Bowring and Wayman Bennett from Unite Against Fascism. Wayman Bennett, let me begin with you. I mean, how bad would you say community relations are at the moment between the police? Or how good are they?
I think the problem is there's a breakdown of trust about exactly what happens to people if they have a confrontation with the police or if there's a problem. Theresa May has said that she cannot justify the levels of stops and searches that take place, and unfortunately she's changed her mind and has considered the reason why people stop and search is because they're black and Asian, and she can't, and the figures show that. That leads to a deep distrust if you're continually stopped for no apparent reason. And I believe the problem with this is that it sparks confrontations. The response to those confrontations can sometimes be heavy-handed, can lead to deaths in custody, and actually we see a whole spiralling of, I think, where things fall apart and they don't have to. And I think it's incumbent on us that after 20, 30 years of the same experience to put forward systems and strategies that can avoid that. But I think burying it or hiding from it or covering up, actually, to be honest, I think would be a disaster. We can learn from this and actually go forward, providing we recognise it.
I mean, historically, Birmingham's had relatively better relations than parts of London have had. But do you think now this incident might, and the way it's come out now, might prejudice the situation there?
I mean, the West London Police, after the Handsworth riots, recognised that it had to change many of its policies and attempted to do that. I mean, part of the problem, I think, is that they attempted to play one community against another one. This community has been very good because it hasn't rioted, this community, and then next, this community is a terrorist community because it's involved in terrorism, and I think that's a poor way of dealing with very, very serious issues, and I think part of that has led to a situation, really, where you don't have cohesive community response to very serious problems. Things will go wrong, but providing people see transparently what is happening, then they'll see that they can go forward. 10,000 people marched for peace and community cohesion inside Birmingham, for all communities and all backgrounds. That is something to be commended. But there's going to be a breakdown of trust. There's been justice denied. There's still a continuation of institutional racism. Stop and search continues, and people feel aggrieved and left out of a very process which they should be involved in.
Well, Tim Parsons, I believe you were in charge of diversity issues in the police at one point, quite recently, in fact.
In my force, yes.
Yes, until, what, 4 years ago or so? I mean, what lessons do you think should be learned from this incident in Birmingham?
From the riots? Or
well, from both, from the way that people must now feel and from the riots initially.
Well, I mean, I think the first point to make here is that, tempting though it is for politicians to try and magic quick eye-catching fixes out of the sky, there aren't any quick fixes. The issue of trust between the police and the public is something that has to be worked at by both the police and the public. And if there are problems that arise, then they have to be dealt with and negotiated in a mature way. I think that the criticism, as I said, of the IPCC are legitimate, but that's not a reason to get rid of the IPCC. Let's strengthen the IPCC. Let's help them to do their job. I think the move towards elected police and crime commissioners is an important reform because it means that local people have an elected representative who's directly responsible for policing.
Nobody took part in the elections, though, did
they? No. Well, it's not true to say no one took part.
Very few.
Few took part. I mean, the same is the case, unfortunately, with all the elections in this country. But, in a sense, that's a different issue. That's a different debate. The important thing is there's a direct route of democratic accountability now between leadership of the police, management of police strategy and oversight, and the citizen. There's a direct democratic link, and I think that's a hugely important
And
reform.
are you glad that Theresa May has now come out with quite strong criticism of the stop and search activities?
Yes, I mean, it's right that the Home Secretary makes these criticisms. It's right that this is reviewed. I think the problem that we have with stop and search, and it continues to be controversial. The problem is if we abolish the stop and search power altogether, which some people have suggested, then how do we detect the person who's walking down the street with a knife under their jacket? How are we going to detect those people? Because we've also got to think about the victims of knife crime, the victims of gun crime, etc. So by all means, we need to continue to have a very active and public debate about this. But I think the solution will continue to prove elusive.
Bill Baring, elusive the solution, or do you think there is something you could recommend?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm old enough that 30 years ago, I was a member of an independent inquiry into police community relations in Brixton before the first Brixton riots, where actually we identified a whole range of problems. And unfortunately, the riots happened. And there was then the Scarman inquiry following that. And there's been actually report and inquiry after inquiry. But 30 years on, have the fundamental lessons been learnt about relations between police and community? This is extremely difficult, and so far it would appear that they haven't actually.
But what is the fundamental lesson? At least one of them. Give us one.
Really, a much more concerted effort to train police, and in particular senior police officers. What one has learnt over the years is that it's a problem of training and a problem of leadership in the police. And actually, in Brixton, after the riots, a very good commander, Jock Marnock, was appointed, as a matter of fact, who made big efforts to get out to the community, and things did improve substantially. I'm afraid to say things went backwards again after that, and really it's systemic problems, as I say, problems of training and problems of leadership in the police.
Wayman Bennett, I mean, the people have brought in a lot of people representing different ethnic groups and religious groups into the police, so they are much more a mirror of society as a whole. Has that gone far enough, or has that made a real difference?
I would say that the problems that were identified inside the Macpherson inquiry of institutional racism still remain a serious problem. And you see, the truth of it is, if stop and search has gone up, it's not gone down, it's actually gone up. I speak to my 21-year-old son who had his trousers pulled down in the middle of the street. If you try and convince him that there's a policy, but he's a law student, right? If you try and convince him that this is because somebody's looking for a knife or he's going to be safe or whatever it is, he and that generation absolutely have no trust at all. And actually, unless you win a targeted approach, I mean, he told me that less than 2% of the stops and searches of his age group end up with the identification of some kind of crime. In other words, it feels to them that it's routine harassment. If you do that to young black and Asian people on the street, I think there's going to be a breakdown of trust, and occasionally they'll resent it to the point where force is used, there'll be a loss of life, and you end up with this constant cycle. And that's the reason why we've had so many deaths in custody, and it's disproportionate. Now, my view is that Theresa May has said that we have to get a grip of this. We can't keep explaining it. The Scarman report, the Macpherson report, at some point we have to say we have to limit this power. If it's going to be abused, it has to be limited, or at least a proper sense of it. The police had that power given back to them, that they didn't have to write a report. And they said we're doing too much paperwork, and therefore we didn't have to give a reason why we stopped and searched people. At very minimum, they have to start giving reasons why they're restricting people's liberty. I believe if you walk down the streets of Surrey and you're stopping and searching people on the same scale that you're stopping black and Asian people, I don't think we'd have to wait 6 months to find out why we're being stopped and searched. We've seen the fallback from Plebgate. It's not just only, I mean, I believe if it hadn't been an MP, if it had been a young black or Asian kid complaining about exactly the same thing, I don't think we'd have had the same level of inquiry. But I do think something's fundamentally wrong, and it has to change fast.
I mean, in Parsons, I mean, isn't there right in a way that trying to sort of prevent crime by stopping and searching is actually exacerbating, increasing the number of crime. Why don't we wait till the crimes happen and then prosecute, rather than, creating more tension by allegedly preventing crime?
Well, we could do that. We could wait until someone ends up with a knife in their stomach and then prosecute the person responsible. But better, in my view, I would suggest to prevent rather than prosecute.
No, but if it's
afterwards.
creating so much tension that it's adding to the sort of environment where crimes happen.
Well, yes, I mean, I accept the point that there is a problem here, but I think if you look at certainly the stop and search data for London, the use of this power has dropped significantly, by up to a third in recent years. So, I think the sort of policy of using it in a fairly sort of reckless and ill-considered way is changing. Do the criteria by which police officers can stop and search need to be probably tightened up a bit more, subject to more scrutiny? I think they probably do. I'm not sure that this is really an issue of training. I think it's more to do with frontline supervision and with police managers scrutinising the way this power is used a bit more than perhaps they have in the past.
Well, that's pretty much what you were saying also, isn't it, Bill Byron? There has to be better management by the senior police officers.
This is where we started in the first half, isn't it? That, somebody at the rank of inspector was able to take such a crucial decision in the middle of a prosecution that it didn't even go to a senior officer. And that seems to suggest that structures are at fault, that this should be able to happen, as a matter of fact. And then for the CPS not to know about it, of course, compounds the issue.
I mean, there is an internal police disciplining process, isn't it? I mean, but is it ever publicised as sort of what officers were disciplined for what, or is it all kept sort of privately, internally?
No. I mean, there have been cases where members of the public being invited into police disciplinary hearings. So it's not all done behind closed doors. But again, is the police disciplinary system something that needs to be reformed, tightened up, reviewed a bit further? These are legitimate issues for political debate. Maybe that they do.
Can I just say that one of the problems is that when we called for an investigation of this kind, like the Macpherson inquiry, we sat around and discussed it, and we set up organisations to hold the police, as democratic, hold police accountable. And we found that police entered our organisation to find out how we were doing it in order to properly oppose us. I find it unbelievable that this could take place in a modern democracy, and that's part of the problem. If we call for an investigation into these processes and the police set up a secret set of police officers to investigate us, and it's not just now. I mean, the Cambridge police tried to pay students to put a secret camera on people that were questioning why they'd been arrested on anti-fascist demonstrations. Do you see what the point I'm making is, if we want to make the police accountable for these things, then they have to take some of the responsibility for what's happening and not see the people who are complaining as the problem. I know that's still under inquiry. What I'm specifically talking about is that in Stephen Lawrence's case, an undercover officer was involved on spying on the family, and we've been told that that's not the only case and that we're going to be receiving further cases. And I think the two things are connected. There's a hostility to holding part of the police accountable for their behaviour, and there's a way of trying to avoid responsibility for when there has been things that have gone wrong or away, and I think that has to change.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the sort of surveillance of the activists involved in the Stephen Lawrence campaign, I mean, I think that's yet to be considered by the public inquiry. It seems highly likely that the authorisation for some of those surveillance operations actually came not from the police but from the Home Office, from the Home Secretary himself. I've certainly put in FOI requests to try and get to the bottom of this, and they've so far been batted away by the Home Office. But hopefully the public inquiry into this will uncover the truth, and it may not all be blame that lies at the police's feet here.
But that's one case. Then there were all the ones, all the environmental activists, when the police were, acting for years as alleged activists when they were really still police people.
But I make the point these surveillance operations were signed off by the Secretary of State,
Right.
not by police officers. You know, there's got to be some political accountability here. It's very easy to blame junior ranking police officers, but who was it who actually authorised it? And are they coming forward and being open with the public about it?
See, for once, I agree with you. If we find out that we go down the rabbit hole and we find that the rottenness actually goes much deeper than that. I mean, apparently Paul Condon came in and gave somebody a bottle of whiskey for congratulating them for the level of investigation against the the Lawrence family. If that is the case, and he was authorised by senior government people to investigate a family who just wanted to find out who killed it, is that the same thing that's happening in Birmingham? If a family complains about trying to find out what happened on the day, that they get investigated rather than finding out who's responsible for the deaths? That's what I'm raising. I think, and who's going to oversee that? The IPCC that can't even find out when things actually go wrong. And I think there has to be a serious re-evaluation of how we deal with these things in a very serious way, not in order to cover it up, but in order to just make it absolutely clear that justice delayed is justice denied. And I think we have to make
Bill,
that.
what about you? I mean, are there changes in the law that are needed, or is this issues of management, basically?
Well, I think it's both, and I would say the scandal over undercover policing, particularly, I mean, in the Stephen Lawrence case, but also in the environmental case, as you say, and police officers apparently acting as provocateurs, not just as undercover informants. I think that's done much more damage to the reputation of the police, actually, than Plebgate, and and there's a kind of continuum. But the fact that these things have come to light recently, and have still not properly come to light, and I think it's very interesting that, the Freedom of Information requests are not being properly dealt with. Well, I think that is a current, very serious problem, which requires changes in the law and in practice and in training. It's systemic. It goes right the way through.
Well, do you think, let me come back to the question we asked at the beginning of the programme, whether we think there could be more riots this summer? I mean, are we going to have a short, hot summer? It's not going to be a long one because it's pretty wet at the moment, but what's it going to be? Are there going to be riots, do you think?
I think there's two problems. I think it's both policing and austerity. I mean, to be honest, in Tottenham, where I work and whatever it is, as soon as they closed down all the youth centres as a response to austerity in major amounts, actually, to be honest, I'm not blaming young people, but I mean, if we have another summer where there's no opportunities for people, and then you have injustice being done, I think you've got the recipe for a disaster. Unfortunately, those things still both exist. Large levels of youth unemployment and large sense of where justice has been delayed and denied. And as long as we've got those two things together, we have the perfect combination for an explosion. So I wouldn't say it won't happen, but I say we've done very little to prevent it from happening.
Well, Tim Parsons, is this an issue on which you again agree with Wayman Bennett or not?
No, in terms of are we going to have more riots? No, I don't think we will. I think that's highly unlikely. I think the riots in 2011 were an aberration. They were caused, in my view, by a failure of policing, and I think that's been addressed now. So I would be very surprised if we saw something on that scale again.
Bill, what's your view?
Well, the thing is, nobody can predict, of course, what's going to happen, but there is a certain regularity in these things, I'm afraid to say. And if one looks back at history, then riots have occurred and do occur. And I agree, I think they're probably unlikely to happen this year. But the situation of exacerbation of lack of confidence and lack of trust, that is really very dangerous.
Well, I think on that note, we have to end the programme. We've come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank my guests, of course, Tim Parsons, Wayman Bennett and Bill Bowring, and of course you at home for watching. Please tune in again for future discussions, and don't forget you can keep up with the discussion by following us on Twitter at the address you see on the screen below, or by following Islam Channel Current Affairs on Facebook. But until next time, thank you and goodbye.